Having remade the first two Resident Evil games, and gloriously so, Capcom are now moving to the third numbered entry in the series, and they're doing it sooner than any of us expected. The spectacular Resident Evil 2 is still very fresh in our memories, and yet in less than 4 months from now, we'll be playing a full-fledged remake of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Being surrounded by what are considered by most to be the best games in the series, RE3 is often overlooked, but advocates of the game will tell you that it's right up there with the very best Resident Evil has ever offered. As such, we're more than just a little excited about the upcoming Resident Evil 3, not least because of Capcom's track record with remakes, and there are certain things we're hoping it'll do, which might just help it live up to the excellent standards set by its most immediate predecessors. In this feature, we'll be talking about 9 things we're hoping Resident Evil 3's upcoming remake will do, starting with expand the story. While remaking both Resident Evil 1 and 2, Capcom expanded the game's stories in significant ways, more so with 1 than with 2, and we're hoping they'll be doing something similar with Resident Evil 3 as well. Given the game's structure and the short window of time it takes place in, it'll be interesting to see how and if they do that, but there's certainly room in there for some narrative threads and character arcs to receive more of a spotlight than they did in the original game, and one of those is Carlos. Carlos was an important character in the original RE3, and kept on becoming more prominent as the story progresses, but he's one character who can benefit from increased time on screen, and certainly looking at the way the game is being promoted from its trailer to the box art that has emerged, it looks like Capcom might be headed that way. One way they can do that is by giving us more time to play as Carlos. He was playable for a very small section of the original game, but by giving him more time, Capcom would not only be increasing the game's playtime, they'd also be expanding the story. Maybe, and I know this specific wish is a bit out there, but maybe there could be 2 campaigns instead of 1, with 1 each for Jill and Carlos. Make Raccoon City bigger. One of the things about Resident Evil 3 that appealed to fans the most back in the day, other than a certain terrifying BOW, was the fact that a huge chunk of it took place in the outdoors, in Raccoon City, and getting to explore the city as it crumbled under the weight of the T-virus was a fascinating experience. With the upcoming remake, Capcom have the perfect opportunity to double down on that strength by expanding the city as an environment. No, they shouldn't go open world, but a larger city with more locations or even larger locations would encourage more exploration, and that isn't something anyone would say no to. Don't cut content. Resident Evil 2's remake stands as one of the best remakes of all time, but as a particular section of the RE fanbase will tell you, it wasn't perfect. It made a few cuts, and though they all turned out to not matter too much in the grand scheme of things, the removal of some enemy types in the game did hurt it just a little bit. With Resident Evil 3, we hope that doesn't happen again. Of course, given the shift in perspectives, and with Capcom having to rethink how many of these enemies will function within the game's new identity, it makes sense that there might have to be some cuts and changes, but hopefully that'll be kept to a minimum. Nemesis. Of course, the real star of the show in Resident Evil 3 is Nemesis. His name being the original game's subtitle kinda gives that away, and he's the primary reason we're as excited about the upcoming remake as we are. Mr. X already took all of us by surprise with how excellent he was in RE2, but as we'll soon discover, that was just a taste. Nemesis is the real deal, and we really hope he isn't neutered or made any less of a threat than he was. A constant pursuer, dogged in his attempts, and armed to the teeth, not just with weapons, but a vast array of attacks. That's what Nemesis needs to be in this remake, just like he was in the original. It'll be interesting to see how Capcom changed things around to make him work in a third-person over-the-shoulder game as opposed to a fixed camera title with tank controls. But if they can make Mr. X as terrifying as he was in RE2's remake, we're quite confident they'll be able to do justice to Nemesis as well. Improve the dodge mechanic. Resident Evil 3 is a lot more action-packed than its predecessors, though still firmly rooted in survival horror as opposed to something like, say, RE5. So it goes without saying that Jill is also more mobile as a character. That entails a dodge move as well, which can actually be quite crucial at times. The only issue is, the dodge move in the original is kind of eccentric, and pulling it off properly isn't always the smoothest or most intuitive. If Capcom will be retaining the dodge in the remake, and they probably will, they need to make sure that it's not so obtuse anymore. Once again, given the shift in perspective, how that dodge move is handled will be interesting to see, and Capcom also need to make sure it doesn't become OP, so here's hoping they can find the right balance. Melee improvements from RE2. Resident Evil 2's remake introduced some interesting changes to melee combat. The knife, which has forever been every Resident Evil fan's best friend, was heavily nerfed, being made into a disposable item, which you couldn't only break but also lose by leaving it buried in a zombie's flesh and not getting it back. We really hope those changes are retained simply because of how much tension they add to the game. Additionally, being able to counterattack zombies by stabbing them with a knife or stuffing a frag grenade or smoke grenade in their mouths was another excellent mechanic, and we're hoping to see more of that in Resident Evil 3 as well. Resistance. It turned out Capcom had pulled a fast one on us when they recently revealed that the experimental multiplayer Resident Evil game they had unveiled earlier this year, Project Resistance, was actually just a multiplayer mode in Resident Evil 3. That, I believe, is something that'll help people accept Resistance a lot more readily, but it'll also help if it's actually good. The idea of asynchronous Resident Evil multiplayer is a lot of fun, and it definitely looks like Resistance is implementing it properly, but Capcom need to make sure that it feels essential, and that it feels like Resident Evil. This also seems like a mode that would benefit hugely from post-launch support, with things such as new maps, enemies, abilities, characters, and more. Things like that would add immensely to the overall package's value and replayability, so here's hoping Capcom have healthy post-launch content lined up for Resistance. Mercenaries. Mercenaries made its debut with Resident Evil 3 all the way back in 1999, and it needs to make a return in the upcoming remake. It's something that added to the package's replay value immensely, and doing those thrilling runs again and again and being rewarded for those with new unlockable costumes was a ton of fun. That needs to come back in RE3's remake, and given the inclusion of the 4th and Tofu Survivor mode in RE2, we're quite confident that it will be. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, please hit the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to switch on the notifications bell icon next to it. That way you'll never miss any of our videos. Thanks for watching.